English one?
No, it works.
Test 1 2 3.
Can you just check English as
English
well?
check
Just check English.
1 2 3. English check 1 2 3.
Yeah, getting it.
Okay, good.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will be commencing shortly. We invite you now to take your seats in the ballroom and switch your communication devices to the silent mode. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will be commencing shortly. We invite you now to take your seats in the ballroom and switch your communication devices to the silent mode. Thank you.
Okay.
That means you live.
Okay.
And you hot swap.
Be able to top Well, Your Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, there are, I'm sure, a few people making their way back in, but I would invite those of you here to take your seats for this concluding session of the Shangri-La Dialogue. We have the theme, ensuring a resilient and stable region, and the word resilience has been used a few times by a number of the ministers addressing this Shangri-La Dialogue, and I think we will want in this final session to tease out what we mean by the word resilient. But it is our concluding session, so each of the speakers will have an opportunity to provide in their prepared remarks, but also in response to questions, their own, as it were, final thoughts on how this Shangri-La Dialogue has proceeded. And I hope that all of you in the hall feel free in the conversations that we'll seek to inspire after the prepared statements to give your own views about how we should assess this Shangri-La Dialogue and the key things that we should conclude on. And we're really happy that we have back again at the Shangri-La Dialogue General Ryacudu, the Minister of Defense of Indonesia. It's a delight to receive for his, I think, second time at the Shangri-La Dialogue, but his first time on this stage, Ron Mark, the Minister of Defense of New Zealand. And of course, we always have the signal honor at this Shangri-La Dialogue that our host nation, Minister of Defense, Dr. Ung En Heng, offers us his reflections as well, which always help us to pull together the threads of the weekend's work. It's been long and hard work, but I think it's been invigorating and stimulating, and those are the attitudes that we want to have as we launch this sixth and concluding plenary session. So could I first invite General Ryacudu, the Minister of Defense of Indonesia, to address the sixth plenary. The floor is yours, sir.
Excellency, the Honorable Singapore Defense Minister, as the host nation, Director General and Chief Executive IISS, Dr. John Chipman, dear Shangri-La Dialogue participants, Excellencies, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is truly an honor and a pleasure for me to stand before you at the sixth plenary of this Shangri-La Dialogue 2019 event, and to have the opportunity to present views about ensuring a resilient and a stable region. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation for the warm welcome and friendly welcome from the government of Singapore. In this regard, the Minister of Defense of Singapore and the organizing committee of this Shangri-La Dialogue 2019 event. And it is an honor for me to deliver my perspective related to the situation in the region. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia affirms the importance of the forum as a media to strengthen productive, interactive communication and dialogue among participants, as well as to seek common understanding and common grounds that lead to finding common solution in addressing our common challenges and impediments that can undermine the peace and stability in the region. In the end, this forum is expected to be able to contribute in the making of the defense policy aiming at the realization, the peace and prosperity for the respective people, as promised by every leader when they campaign to win the election. The defense minister, as the assistant of our leader, we have to assist the leader to realize the promise, especially in the field of defense in the region. So at the same time, this forum can also assist to turn uncertainty into certainty. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN is a miracle, is a global miracle. I repeat, ASEAN is a global miracle. It has been 52 years since, and we are always united. Despite we have diversity and fundamental differences, ranging from ethnicity, religions, culture, languages, and geographic location and interests. However, with the spirit of unity of ASEAN, we keep resolve any differences in the peaceful manners and ways, as it is promised, as it is as it is agreed during the signing of ASEAN Charter. Our common region is a strategic maritime fulcrum in the Indo-Pacific area, which stretches from the north in South China Sea, followed by the North Natuna waters, then goes into Malacca Strait, then goes to the south to Sunda Strait and Indian Ocean. This fulcrum is an international trade line from the west to the east and north to the south, which is worth not less than $5.3 trillion each year, and becomes a third of the world trade values. All ASEAN members have a consensus and agree that building security and stability is a foundation and a key to build prosperity. Without stability and security, it will be difficult for prosperity to be realized. The key of the ASEAN unity is our commonalities and similarities of our perspective and views, with the basic values containing sincerity, honesty, mutual interest, transparency, and openness for the sake to realize our joint common goal for to realizing welfare, prosperity, peace, stability in the area that becomes our common home. ASEAN is a concept and also a ways, and the key to the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. In ASEAN, we continue to seek and enlarge our similarities and commonalities, and decreasing and minimize the differences. ASEAN also proved the entity as an inclusive community, in which it would like to invite all parties and partners to come together, and that has the same like-minded partner and have the same vision. Therefore, ASEAN has 8 strategic partners known as the ASEAN Plus. This is what ASEAN always does. Ladies and gentlemen, besides being united by the same values and objective, ASEAN has also never been separated from various strategic environmental dynamics and challenges, which have an impact on the emergence of various challenges and threats having the potential to disrupt regional stability. But we are very optimistic that challenges is that opportunities is more than challenges. The ASEAN leaders continue to communicate, meet, and continue to discuss on how to build and how to take advantages of an opportunity and to reduce and eliminate various types of threat. There has been many different efforts taken to overcome these challenges in several meetings. In anticipating those threats, ASEAN has a strong area of defense and security architecture, which become the deterrence effect for a wide variety of threats trying to infiltrate. ASEAN also agreed, and we have the same point of view in facing threats and challenges. We agreed that the threats and challenges we face in ASEAN are the same and common. Some similarities and commonalities that reflect the image of the cooperation of partner countries and ASEAN, among others, is the similarity of potential challenges and shared factual and real threat, comprised of three dimensions of threat, namely the non-factual threat, because we don't consider any nation, other nation as a threat, and we have also our non-traditional threat or factual threats, and also the third one is non-physical threat, which is the threat of influencing the mindset of the people in the region. On this occasion, allow me also to convey the development of the soft power approach as part of Indonesian defense strategy. Our Indonesian defense diplomacy has produced optimal and effective results. It is proven that Indonesia does not have enemies with any countries and always promote friendship. And for the factual threat and main threat that we currently facing, that is starting from terrorism and development of radicalism, separatism, and armed rebellion. We face the separatism in Indonesia, the Philippines, as well as the southern Thailand, and as well as natural disaster and environment, and as well as the disease outbreaks, cyber, and drug abuse and trafficking. The third threat, which is the non-physical threat that are very dangerous at the same time, is the so-called the threat of mindset of radicalism, with the concept of caliphate or khilafah driven by IS group from Syria and Iraq, who tries to disrupt the area stability in the region. We also need to cooperate to resolve the Rohingya refugees issues, since the mismanagement of the problem would create another target for the IS group recruitment. Hence, the role of the United Nations is also vital in mitigating the issue of Rohingya refugee. With the use of soft power, this threat continues to work systematically and structured, as well as very massive, to influence the mindset of our community in the region, especially in the area of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. The threat of terrorism and radicalism that we face today are the threat of the third generation of terrorists. The special character from the third generation is the return of the IS foreign fighters from the Middle East. IS was only the strength of national militia in Iraq, which emerged as a result of internal political conflict after the fall of government of Saddam Hussein. Let me reiterate here, and let me emphasize here, that IS is only the fruit of the Iraq and Syria domestic political conflict that has nothing to do with religious factors. The operational and tactics concept of this terrorist group will keep and continuing to evolve and have an evaluation and experience change, so that the security forces do not easily detect them. As what happened in Indonesia recently, where the IS group used the new mode of terrorism attack carried out by one whole family, which is occurred in several places. In Surabaya, Indonesia, East Java, and last month in Sibolga in Sumatra, Indonesia, and several terrorist action in several regions in Indonesia. They are not Islam, because the teaching of Islam are always peaceful teachings, which the so-called rahmatan lil alamin. It doesn't make any sense that a mother that can invite her children to commit suicide. As a mother of her children, she should have the nature and instinct to protect her children and to maintain their children, the welfare of the children, like a tiger. They are a very wild animal, but the tiger even will not kill their children. But it is the mindset has been influenced that the mother would like to invite the children to commit suicide. We cannot let this to grow in this region. If it is growing, then maybe in 5 or 10 years from now, it will be very dangerous and damaging for the world. So we have to solve this issue and this problem together. This perverted and misguided concept of ideology, that what we must fight together. Terrorism and radicalism have torn our trust apart to each other. Terrorism also has the potential to damage the bonds of brotherhoods and the values of tolerance, which is the essence of ASEAN values and culture. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia, as the world's largest Muslims in the world, about 200 million, around 200 million out of 260 million. If only around 0.5% become the IS supporter and sympathizer, it means that there are among about 1 million people. It is indeed a very fantastic amount, and in overcoming radicalism and IS threats, Indonesia adopts the mindset construction and strengthening the strategy of our people, strengthening the mindset of our people for the entire of Indonesian people by instill and embedding the value of original our nature culture and nation culture, and has been in existence since the past as our identity and our value, and also so as not to be displayed by the IS radical ideology. 96% of Indonesian people against the IS development. It is also reflected through the existence of religious organization, social organization, and youth organization, and many more that have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Defense to be ready to fight against radicalism and IS. And for the 4% who have not answered the survey, they must be guided and guarded, so they do not take sides on or sympathize to IS. In fact, at the same time, in Indonesia, the amount of IS supporter is only about 700 people. However, it should not be allowed, and we have to resolve it completely and quickly, so as not to trouble us in the future. As the Indonesia Defense Minister for Defense, I have designed the total defense strategy that also include all the people of Indonesia through the concept of state defense, or the so-called bela negara, which involve all the element of the Indonesian people to eradicate terrorism. The awareness of state defense is based on the cultural values in our 5 principles as the ideology and foundation of the Indonesian state and nation. In the study of John Nye's books, the title is The Future of Power. It was found that the aspect of armed physical or military operation contributes only in eradicating terrorism is only contributing 1% to resolve the root cause of terrorism, while the 99% to resolve the problem radicalism is determined by the effort of the whole and the involvement of all people through the planting of the awareness with the value of the state defense spirit. Dear ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN also has the powerful resilience and deterrence effect. In ASEAN, we have about 620 million people, and not to mention the armed forces personnel and member is about 2.6 million. If we put it together, it becomes the most powerful force, and it is like a totality power that to anticipate various threats and challenges. When we are united, there are no single challenges or threat that can infiltrate ASEAN. Indonesia is always present with the various concept of solution. within the area of defense and security architecture, Indonesia has offered the Our Eyes initiative, which is the intelligence exchange sharing and cooperation. Indonesia is very grateful for the support of all ASEAN and ASEAN Plus partners, where the Our Eyes cooperation of intelligence exchange and information exchange has been adopted by ASEAN and the 8 partner countries, including the United States, Russia, China, Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, at the ADMM Plus meeting in Singapore last year. There are also other, in ASEAN we also have like 3 kinds of joint patrol. The first one is in the waters of in the region, from the Malacca Strait patrol, Gulf of Thailand, and quite recently is the Sulu waters patrols. The other Indonesian measure and initiative are done through the strengthening the trilateral cooperation platform with Malaysia, the Philippines, which will be followed with the joint land exercise in Tarakan, Indonesia next month. Let me once again, there are 3 stages of trilateral operation. The first one is the maritime patrol in Sulu waters, that are very fruitful. Previously, the Sulu water is the stronghold of pirates that tried to attack people for ransoms. Since our joint patrol, the activities of the pirate has reduced very significantly and almost eliminated. And it is continued with the air patrol, and in the future we will continue and we will conduct the joint land forces operation between Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and if it is needed, we will crush them and crush the terrorists in the Philippines and or in the southern Philippines. The indicator of success for this nation platform of cooperation is the drastic reduction in the incident of the piracy and acts of terrorism around Sulu water or NC. In the past 3 years, there have been relatively no incident of piracy, so that the wheel of economy and the sea transportation lines are relatively safe and controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia as a part of ASEAN also continues to observe the dynamics of the development of a strategic environment, including anticipating the emergence of the strategic environment dynamics on the North Korea Peninsula or the nuclear issue in the North Korea, as well as the South China Sea development. Indonesia really hopes all countries in the region be united with the same vision. By having the same vision, we will build a common way of common thinking, and we will build unity and stability. In response to the situation of the South China Sea, Indonesia or ASEAN will bring forward the concept of peacekeeping by building cooperation and mutual trust. There are some suggestions and proposals for implementing joint patrol at Shanghai Dialogue 2015.
Konsep patroli bersama
the joint patrol concept is already implemented in the form of maritime patrol ASEAN-China, which was initiated by Singapore a year ago, and a joint patrol United States and ASEAN to be conducted in the following September. The core of unity is our common sincerity in realizing our prosperity for the whole community in the area, which is based on trust to keep the trust, then disclosure and transparency, which is based on our sincerity. And it has to become our principle in the character of the community of ASEAN. And yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's been really splendid. Thank you very much.
And I think it was very important for us all here to listen to your describing the particular difficult challenge that Indonesia faces to combat extremist ideology, and also at the same time to deal with the problem of radicalized individuals who may be returning to Indonesia following experiences in the Middle East. So thank you for delivering that central message for us. With that, could I ask the Minister of Defence of New Zealand to take the floor? Thank you.
Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te nākau. O nā tangata, ko te mea nui, ko te aroha, te he mori ora. E nā tangata whenua o Singapore, tēnā koutou. E te iwi o te moana nui a kiwa, tēnā koutou. Apati hono, tātai hono, rātou kua wehi, aptu ke te pō. Apati hono, tātai hono, tātou e tu ana ki te pō. My apologies to the translators, but this being a very prestigious meeting of distinguished representatives from all over the world, my people back home would be disappointed in me if I did not acknowledge you all and our host, Singapore, appropriately in our native tongue. Greetings to colleagues, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, as we would say back home, greetings whānau. Firstly, thank you to our Singaporean hosts for your very warm hospitality, and the International Institute of Strategic Studies for the invitation to speak on a topic very important to New Zealand. As with my esteemed colleagues on the panel today, I will share with you my nation's perspectives on how to assure long-term stability in relations among the states with vital interests in the security of the region. The greatest challenges confronting our nations at present are global, but in order for us to address them, we need to act local. We must create better links between our communities and our nations, because together we are stronger in the face of the many challenges facing our region and the world today. In New Zealand, that thinking manifests itself through our community, nation, world framework that guides our work and our engagement. In New Zealand, today I wish to put forward New Zealand's view on this topic across 4 themes: tackling global challenges, understanding our individual motivations, forging genuine people-to-people links, and maintaining agile contemporary security architecture. Tackling global challenges. Our international rules-based order is under pressure. Strategic competition and territorial disputes threaten to compromise our national interests. Our defence forces are increasingly responding to more frequent and powerful natural disasters. Transnational crime and violent extremism threaten our social fabric, and cyber attacks compromise our financial, communications and political integrity. During this period of turbulence, we must always remember the small nations who are particularly susceptible to these complex and compounding challenges. We are particularly seeing this dynamic play out in areas where our national interests converge, such as the busy maritime trade routes of this region. We all want a safe, secure and prosperous region, regardless of any of our geographical locations. And one clear global challenge that requires a collective response, including from our militaries, is the climate crisis. New Zealand's 2018 Defence Assessment on Climate Change and Security laid out the very real security implications of climate change. When the effects of climate change intersect with a complex array of environmental and social issues, they threaten to undermine human and social development. They will likely be a significant contributor to both low-level instability and more violent conflict. Climate migration has the potential to heighten security concerns in the Pacific and extend into both the maritime Southeast Asia and South Asia. Militaries are a key player in our response to this, because we're involved in both ends of the scenario. We bring enviable resources and value, specifically in HADAR responses and in stabilization activities, but we are also some of the heaviest consumers of fossil fuels and polluters through carbon emissions. This is where the collective action comes in, and real work has already begun on this issue. Through our strong, honest relationships, we have a better chance to address these challenges. Our combined efforts will be pivotal in maintaining resilience and achieving long-term stability in the region and more globally. Understanding individual motivations. To meet these challenges, we must all be clear and transparent in communicating our individual motivations. How New Zealand articulates our motivations and views on our strategic environment is set out in our Strategic Defence Policy Statement. It reinforces how we see the world and the fundamental principles underpinning our defence policy. It reflects New Zealand's long-standing interests and deeply held values, and it proudly states how our military delivers value for the community, our nation, and the world. And as you know, New Zealand is a Pacific country. We are linked by history, culture, politics, and demographics, and we are of the Pacific. This is personal. We are family. And our prosperity and security is intrinsically linked to that of all other Pacific Island nations. And on that note, I do want to thank John Chipman and IISS for holding the first special session on the South Pacific, and look forward to it being a fixed part of the Shangri-La dialogue going forward. In February 2018, my government announced Pacific Reset. The reset is both a vision and a commitment to lift our ambition as part of the Pacific community. It is about changing our mindset to address the increasingly complex issues in our region. It emphasizes both what we are doing in the region as well as how we operate. Foremost, it is about genuine partnership and mutual respect. In many ways, the Pacific region is where New Zealand matters most and can have a more positive impact. It is our neighbourhood. It is where we most certainly act locally. Through our Strategic Defence Policy Statement, we raised the priority placed on our Defence Force's ability to operate in the Pacific to the same level as New Zealand's own territory, the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. Later this month, I will unveil a plan to grow our Defence Force capability and capacity to project and sustain operations throughout the Pacific region. This is crucial because our maritime area of responsibility spans over 9% of the Earth's surface, stretching from the South Pole and Antarctica to the equator. Yet, we are a nation of just 4.8 million people. Our ability to respond to the challenges across this vast area is an issue of foremost importance as we face concurrent threats across the region. By communicating our motivations openly in this way, it means you, our international partners, can clearly see what we stand for and where we are prepared to take action. If we are all transparent in our motivations, we reduce the risk of misunderstanding and miscalculation. The next step is getting to know each other, genuinely. It is our shared motivation for a safe, secure, prosperous region that brings our communities together. And at the heart of our efforts in the Pacific is a focus on building deeper, more mature political partnerships with Pacific Island countries and institutions. On that note, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, Dame Meg Taylor. The Boy Declaration issued last year calls for additional collective Pacific action to address new and traditional security challenges, including climate change. It is one of the most significant statements on regional security by Pacific leaders in a generation. It is a clear articulation from the Pacific of our security needs. It gives us a compass for action, and we must follow it. And I urge all other nations to heed the same call. For collective action to be effective, we need a common set of rules. The Pacific's peak body, the Pacific Islands Forum, is supported by many existing regional architectures, such as the South Pacific Defence Ministers Meeting. I attended the most recent engagement with the regional defence ministers last month in Fiji, where we agreed to adopt 10 recommendations aimed to promote information sharing, collaboration on defence, climate change and security. In the Pacific, New Zealand is also a key member of an agreement between France, Australia and New Zealand to coordinate disaster reconnaissance and relief assistance in the Pacific. This is vital, as we have seen increasingly harsh weather events happening more frequently with more devastating effect, affecting more people. We underpin our relationships with exercises including Tropic Twilight, Southern Katapo, SkyTrain, which we use to build confidence and develop practical military-to-military cooperation for the benefit of our work in the Pacific. These exercises often include a range of partner militaries, including both the United States of America and China. We are also building partnership programs with the Pacific militaries and security forces to increase their capacity and capabilities in areas of mutual interest, including leadership development, gender integration, and peacekeeper training. But the Pacific is not alone in facing this tapestry of global challenges. In the Indo-Pacific, the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus has gone from strength to strength over the past 9 years. Supporting and continuing to strengthen ASEAN is vital to promoting regional resilience, and the ADMM Plus remains New Zealand's principal forum for multilateral defence engagement in Asia. But our security architecture is only useful if it remains relevant. It cannot descend into dialogue for dialogue's sake. To maintain relevance, we must continuously adjust and adapt to new challenges, working together to ensure our security architecture remains fit for purpose and energised. So in conclusion, today I ask all states with interest in the security of the region to resolve to come together collectively to tackle global challenges, to be clear on their individual motivations, to forge genuine understanding and people-to-people links, and to maintain agile and contemporary security architecture. Environmental security concerns, including the intensifying impacts of climate change, is one that, especially as defence ministers, we should not ignore. From my perspective, the best chance we have to maintain resilience and enjoy long-term stability in the region is for all countries to embrace ASEAN's one community vision and commit to collective action globally and to stand strong together. A famous chief and leader of my Ngāti Porou tribe on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand, Sir Apirana Ngāta, once said, "He aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata." What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. We owe it to our people to be successful, because ultimately all they want is to live in a safe and secure world. And we can do that if we work together. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā mai tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Thank you, Minister Mark, for many things, but in particular three. First, for in common with your Australian counterpart, reminding us of the centrality of the climate change challenge for your people. Second, for adding to the previous triptych of important words, trust, rules, and norms, the fourth word, transparency. And finally, for your kind endorsement of our decision to indeed have a special session at this Shangri-La Dialogue on Pacific Island Nations. And can I promise you that we will want to make that a regular feature of this Shangri-La Dialogue process. And indeed, the Executive Director of ISS Asia, Tim Huxley, and I have been talking about how we might do, as the ISS, much more work on Pacific Island security. And I hope we will be able to work with you in advancing that aim and finding other ways to bring together the Pacific Island leaders in pursuit of that common aim of peace for your people. So thank you very much. With that, could I invite the Minister of Defence of Singapore, our host country, to make his remarks to this concluding plenary.
Dr. John Chipman, my esteemed co-panelists, Ryamizard and Minister Ron Mark. First, on behalf of my colleagues at MINDEF, Senior Minister of State Heng Chee Hao, Senior Minister of State Maliki, and Senior Minister Teo, thank you all for being here at this Shangri-La Dialogue. We are very thankful, especially for our Muslim colleagues, because this is a month of Ramadan, and I seek your understanding that these meetings are booked ahead of time at a fixed slot within the year, and sometimes it coincides, and I ask for your understanding for the discomfort it might have caused you. I want to thank especially all of you for being here and for contributing to the various discussions. If there's any reason why the Shangri-La Dialogue is relevant and some would say impactful, it is because of your presence, and I want to thank you for taking time to be here. Over the past 18 years, since the inception of the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2002, we've had the privilege to observe history in the making for this region, and some here even as principal actors. Since then, at each Shangri-La Dialogue, dubbed Asia's premier security summit, we have dissected, commented, criticized, argued, and sought consensus on the way forward toward a stable, progressive, and inclusive region, primarily for security, but just as important, for economic prosperity, because security and economic progress are but two faces of the same coin. By historical timelines, 18 years is but a blip, and yet much has occurred for those of us who lived through these times, and it's not an exaggeration to state that through the last 2 decades, Asia has been transformed. But events in the last month or so, specifically the breakdown of a trade deal between the US and China, and in its place, the tariff and technology barriers erected between them, have altered the trajectory of this region onto an altogether different orbit. Year after year, many at Shangri-La Dialogue had cautioned against this outright rivalry between the two leading economies and militaries of the world. Even so, it has come to pass, with potential for great harm on all countries here and beyond. How did we get here? When Shangri-La Dialogue was first launched in 2002, a decade or so had passed since the US and its Western allies had won the Cold War. There was a mood to reap the peace dividend. A published report by the National Intelligence Council on Russia in 2001 predicted that Russian foreign policy moving forward would be characterized by, quote, weakness and frustration, primarily with the US as the preeminent power over Russia's weakness, unquote. One must remember that since 1991 then, Russian working-age males had a 60% increase in mortality, in deaths from alcohol abuse, traffic accidents, and violent crimes. It was, in medical parlance, a social phenomenon and something which we rarely see. Even so, economic prosperity was not one of the direct peace dividends to be reaped by the US or Europe. Instead, the average annual GDP growth of the United States fell by almost half, from 3.2% in the 1990s to 1.8% from the year 2000 to 2009, as a result of three economic setbacks: the dot-com bust in year 2000, the stock market crash of 2002, and the global recession of 2007. Since 2010, the US economy has grown slightly faster, but only at an average of 2.2%. Europe, too, experienced average annual GDP growth at 1.6% throughout the 2000s. Neither was prolonged peace for the US and its allies achieved after the Cold War. Following the 9/11 attacks, their military deployments in the Middle East have been the longest since World War II. The war on terror continues as we speak, with a hefty bill, now estimated to have cost the US $1.5 trillion since 2001. If the US and its Western liberal democracies expected to bask in the golden age of capitalism post-Cold War, it certainly did not fully materialize. In contrast, it was China, after Deng Xiaoping lifted the bamboo curtain to focus on economic growth, that flourished as a dazzling debutante in the globalized ball, and with it, much of Asia. In contrast to the US and Europe's sub-2% growth, China recorded an astonishing average GDP growth of 9% over 2000 to 2017. China accounted for 13% of global trade in 2017, more than a threefold rise from 4% in the year 2000. The US and EU's share declined. The US share declined from 12 to 9%, and EU from 39 to 33%. As could be anticipated, China has been the main trading partner of ASEAN countries since 2009 and replaced the US as the world's largest trading nation in 2013. It was with this ascendant China that President Xi Jinping took office in 2013 and pushed for China to play a larger role in global affairs. Xi set the national agenda to achieve the two milestones of centennials of the founding of China in 2049 and the CCP in 2021. Military spending from China increased pari passu with economic growth. Chinese defense expenditure increased exponentially from US 41 billion in the year 2000 to US 204 billion in 2015. China also became more assertive in its position in the South China Sea, now defined as a core interest. In the economic sphere, the Belt and Road Initiative was launched in 2013. Today, at least US 700 billion has been committed for the Belt Road Initiative, 7 times that of the Marshall Plan, with the potential to become the most impactful macroeconomic undertaking in our world for this century. Perhaps, and in retrospect, this state of paradoxical fortunes of victors and those supposedly vanquished was never sustainable. When I read the reports by Princeton researchers in 2017 that documented a sharp decline in the life expectancy of middle-aged working-class white Americans from, quote, deaths of despair due to alcohol abuse, suicides, or drug overdose, it was a micro data point that explained much of why US domestic politics had changed. Those rising death rates were nearly twofold compared to minorities. In other words, US working class middle-aged Americans had a twofold death rates compared to minorities in the US as well. Especially in the Rust Belt, and this explained in some part the success of the Trump campaign and subsequent victory in the presidential election. There was a déjà vu with the Russian males that experienced post-Cold War a rise in mortality. A vastly different context, but in both instances, the angst and vitriol of citizens whose lives had worsened clamored for strongman politics to right perceived wrongs. The new trajectory is now that of a US foreign policy to redress the perceived imbalances accumulated over the past 2 decades, encapsulated in America First, and according to this narrative, an America that has been taken advantage of. We can understand, even appreciate the underlying motivations, but the implications are as troubling as they are unpredictable. It is, in essence, a disruptive change, not only for the US and its allies, but indeed the world. The crystal ball, if it was ever clear, is now densely fogged. Questions abound. On trade, how far, wide, and long will the US pursue this tack of tariff and technological barriers? How will those US efforts, if persistent, impact the current global trading system? Will the result be mere additions and alterations, or much worse, the denouement of the last 70 years of the efforts for globalization? Can the multilateral trading systems even survive, especially when it clashes against US-led trading blocs and China-dependent economies? One aspect is clear. Few think the world will grow at a faster pace in the near future, with such uncertainty hanging over us all. With slower growth, how will China be impacted, whose workforce is expected to decline by 200 million by 2050, with social spending for an aging population set to increase? What pressures might China, in responding, put on other countries that are economically dependent on it? More importantly, how will the Communist Party of China shore up its political legitimacy if their economies slow? For the US, how does this shift to a new, more transactional foreign and security policy affect their acceptance by other nation states, friends, and even allies? The challenge for both the United States and China, amid their bilateral struggle as dominant powers in Asia, is to offer that inclusive and overarching moral justification for acceptance by all countries, big and small, of their dominance beyond military might. Both countries have cited security as the basis for their current positions, the US in trade and China in the South China Sea. But whatever the underlying motivations for either country, if America first or China's rise is perceived to be lopsided against the national interests of other countries or the collective good, the acceptance of US or China's dominance will be diminished. Countries will hedge first in trade ties and later, inevitably, in security alliances. We saw this in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, where 11 nations chose to proceed after the US pulled out, with the Japanese and Australians leading to establish the 11-member CPTPP. Even China has not said no to joining this CPTPP. For the European Union, if it perceives that the US terms for trade are too onerous to bear, it is not inconceivable that it might even increase its engagement with China or seek other partners apart from the US. Worse still is the situation where individual countries have to choose between the US or China, be it in technology, be it in trade, security, or comprehensive partnerships. That will be the ultimate loser's game and a race to diminishing benefits for all concerned. What is at stake is the existing global order that, even if not perfect, has ensured peace and progress these past 70 years. It would be an egregious folly to throw this baby out with the bathwater. It remains for me to thank all of you for your presence and contributions at Shangri-La Dialogue. Let me put on record our deep thanks to Dr. John Shipman as Chief Sherpa with your other Sherpas as you guide us to ascend the summits of détente, if not partnerships. I also want to put on record, and I'm sure all of you would agree, our thanks to our police, our Civil Defense Force, and our MINDEF officers and SAF officers who have facilitated your visit, your calls, and made this event of value to you. Thank you very much. I wish you all safe journeys and good health.
Thank you very much for those thanks, and also for the important central message of your address, and appeal to both the United States and China to better explain their claims of preeminence and to ground them legitimately. We now have time for questions and comments. There's more than a dozen people who've sought the floor. I'll try to engage as many as you can, and then return to the panel in the order in which they first spoke to provide their replies and concluding reflections. Could I first ask Liselotte Odgaard?
Thank you. Thank you for some interesting speeches. I have two questions, one for the Singaporean Defense Minister. You mentioned how other countries might look for other partners than the US and China, and you were warning against that, as I heard you. But could it not be a good thing, for example, that Europe and Japan seek together around a strategic partnership, around economic agreements? Could that not be a way of changing the behavior of US and China in positive ways? And for the Indonesian defense minister, you mentioned the South China Sea, and historically Indonesia has played a role in forging cooperation and try to improve relations in this problematic region. Do you envisage any role for other countries than the indigenous countries? For example, Europe, could they play a positive role in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. I had John Rain on my list, but I think he pressed his button again. Here we are, John Rain.
Thank you, John. My question relates to the comments from Minister Ryacudu about the challenge faced in the region by Islamic radicalization and terrorism. I wanted to know how the panelists were going to ensure that the so far positive narrative about the Indo-Pacific economic boom and the very positive view which has been taken of the future of the region remains a positive narrative for the world's largest Islamic community which lives in that region.
Thank you. Aaron Connolly.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Bapak Menteri Pertahanan, I want to add my condolences on the death of Ibu Ani Yudhoyono yesterday morning here in Singapore. Many in this room may be unfamiliar with the Bela Negara program, which you spoke about at length, which aims to graduate 100 million individuals over 10 years through a political indoctrination program. I was intrigued by your suggestion that this program could be used to fight against radicalization, Islamist radicalization. I was wondering if you could provide any data that your ministry may have produced that this has been effective. I'd also like to ask whether or not, at a time when there is growing concern about politicization of key state institutions in Indonesia, whether it is really appropriate in a democracy like Indonesia for the Defense Ministry to be running a political indoctrination program, and indeed whether it is wise, whether it doesn't invite other state institutions to attempt to do the same, such as the police. Thanks very much.
Vicky Fauzia.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. It's Fika Fauzia.
Sorry.
So there is a sizable Muslim population in the region, particularly Indonesia, Malaysia, also in Singapore and the Philippines. One of the rallying issues or calls to unite the Muslim population in the region is the plight of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. So how should governments respond to create stability in the region for its people when it is the position of China, as mentioned by General Wei's remarks this morning, that China's policy to combat terrorism in Xinjiang, as I quote, absolutely right? Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Huxley, the Executive Director of ISS Asia, who I should congratulate on his enormously central role in helping to convene this Shangri-La dialogue. Tim.
Thank you very much, John. My question is for Pak Ryamizard. Minister, in your address, you made the case very strongly that ASEAN has always been united, but I think many observers would argue that in relation to some of the major strategic dilemmas that the region has faced, such as the widely perceived challenge in the South China Sea, and also the humanitarian and security challenge posed by the mass exodus of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, ASEAN unity has actually sometimes, unfortunately, been conspicuously missing. In turn, that means that the Southeast Asian region has been, and unfortunately maybe will be in the future, vulnerable to the effects of major power competition. My question is this: what can be done to make ASEAN more genuinely effective in responding to regional security challenges and thus creating real regional resilience in the long term for Southeast Asia? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ravi Vellore.
Thank you, John. This question is directed to His Excellency, the Minister from Indonesia. So you were here last year, and at that time, the Indo-Pacific was still a nascent concept. This year, you hardly heard the phrase Asia-Pacific. It was all about the Indo-Pacific. Thus, Indonesia, which you described as the maritime fulcrum, have a view on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, if you look at the Japanese, they call it an Indo-Pacific vision. The Americans call it an Indo-Pacific strategy. Does ASEAN and Indonesia have a particular view on this concept? And secondly, I'd like to take off from what Tim asked, but also include what you said in your speech. You listed out the common threats, but also made some time to speak about the 620 million people and 2.3 million people under arms, and together what deterrent it could be. Now that ASEAN is entering the second half century of its existence, do you see any possibility at all that, given that many of you use common platforms, that there could be some steps, baby steps, towards a common defense policy on the lines of the European Union? Thank you.
James Hackett.
Thanks, John. My question is to the New Zealand Defence Minister. You mentioned a plan to grow your forces in the Pacific region. I wonder if you can give us a sort of sneak preview, perhaps, of that, whether there'll be any new equipment, maybe a year after the P8 announcement, or new partnerships. But more broadly, as New Zealand looks to grow its presence and partnerships in the Pacific region, will it remain as involved globally? For instance, apart from UN peacekeeping operations, I think your Iraq mission is due for renewal at the end of June, and Afghanistan in September. I mean, will they be renewed? Thank you.
Nick Bidley.
Thanks, John. One of the most important parts of the sort of past 2 or 3 decades has been a sort of agreement across the region about the economic rules of the game and a value in economic openness. And I think one of the most worrying parts of the current era is the politicization of international economic relations, whether it's the trade war most obviously with the US or other elements of overt politics and geopolitical competition seeping into economic relations. And I was wondering whether there was something that the lesser powers in the region could do to prop up or support economic openness. And Dr. Eng hinted at this, but I was wondering if the panel might reflect on things that everyone other than the big two can do to take some of the political heat out of economic relations.
Christian Supriyanto.
Thank you, Dr. Chiman. My question goes to all speakers. This morning, the Chinese Defense Minister lambasted the U.S. Freedom of Navigation Operations, or FONOP, in the South China Sea as an act of provocation and called for its termination. My question is, what do you think the consequences will be if the U.S. government is to seize FONOP in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. William Chung.
Thank you, John. My question is for all the ministers as well, in particular Dr. Ng. It seems that even after PM Lee's keynote on Friday about asking the China and US to work together and play nice, we've seen pretty much a dialogue of the deaf. I mean, we've seen the US entrenched in his position against Chinese activities, primarily in the South China Sea, and General Wei giving a very masterful narrative of how China will not attack, but will attack if it is attacked. So, as a small country that thinks big, as was mentioned on Friday evening, how do you think, as a Sherpa, you can kind of shepherd us out of this delicate dilemma? Thank you.
Thank you. Zhao Zhao.
Thank you, Chair. My question goes to Singaporean Defense Minister, Dr. Huang. You are the co-host of the Shangri-La Dialogue, and also you have attended the Beijing Xiangshan Forum for at least 3 times. So between the two forums, there are similarities and also there are differences. So can you give a comparison about the two forums or any comments or advice to the two forums? Thank you.
Thank you very much. From Germany, Reinhard Bütikofer. Sorry, I think you just turned your microphone off as it happened.
My question goes to the Minister of Defense from Singapore. Sir, you described how the US and China both have been pursuing trajectories that many warned against. And indeed, they are now both putting other countries before binary choices. The disruption that you described, in my analysis, amounts to the return of traditional big power politics, where the strong act as they will and the weak act as they must. What can lesser powers do to rein in this hegemonic competition?
Thank you very much. So I'll take 2 more interventions, and then I'll come back and ask each of the panelists to respond in the order in which they originally spoke. If you could take no more than a couple of minutes each. But first, if I could ask Jursan bin Matia.
Yes, my question is to Pak Ryamizard and Dr. Ng. What are your positions exactly on the expansion of ADMM+? There's been a few countries asking to join the grouping, so where is the roadmap to that, and how does Singapore and Indonesia respectively stand on these membership applications?
Thank you. And finally, could I end with Caroline Atkinson?
Thank you very much, John. I'm struck, coming from Washington,
by how much more seriously the rift is being taken between the US and China here in the region than I think it's been treated in America, and that's thought-provoking and I wish it would be thought-provoking also for the US government. But I wanted to address the question raised about economics by the Minister for Singapore and our host, and thank you for that linkage. How much do you think that a reversal of economic trends with stronger growth and so on can damp down this competition? And do defense ministers have a role in arguing for different economic policies? Should these be also a topic for us here? Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And we do our best to mingle the geoeconomic and the geostrategic questions. So we thank you for that challenge. And if we're ready, we can return to the panel. Perhaps could I invite Minister Ryacudu to offer some thoughts on what he's heard? If you just press the button to the right.
Thank you so much for all the question. Quite many questions. Related to the development or the establishment of situation in the South China Sea. It was back to 2016. I came to see the Chinese delegation. And I suggest and give them advice about the openness and transparency. I mentioned to him, I said to him that maybe everyone don't understand you, but I said that I understand China. The most important that you have to conduct joint coordinated patrol together, joint patrol to secure the area. The Chinese head of delegation said that to conduct joint patrol with Indonesia is fine. And the second one will conduct the patrol with ASEAN, and he is very happy with that. And then this answer was followed up when I had a meeting in Beijing. Around 3 months after that meeting, General Fan Changlong, the former military commissioner, he is above the commander-in-chief, and he mentioned to all of the ASEAN defense ministers, and he said that, gentlemen, the South China Sea is our backyard. So we have to secure the South China Sea together, then we utilize together. So which means that China already tends to open. So that's why it has to be followed up and pursued, the openness of China and transparency. And some years after that, and ASEAN conduct some joint patrol with China, with this perspective that General Fan Changlong already mentioned that openness of China is already been done. That's about the development of South China Sea. And the next question is, how to maintain the economic in the region that can influence the situation also. Economy is like a Bitcoin with the security. The two faces in one coin. There is no security without economy, and there is no economy without security. And I keep mentioning that ASEAN is in the middle, located in the middle. From west to the east, and from east to the west will pass ASEAN region. And even from south to the north and north to the south will pass ASEAN region also. So that's why ASEAN is very dominant in this region. So that's why you have to ensure the security, which means that economy will also be ensured. And I said that about 5 trillion economy will pass through ASEAN. If it is disrupted, of course, the economy in ASEAN will be disrupted as well. So that way we have to be together. And I keep have a meeting with the defense minister of ASEAN. At least with the defense minister, I met about 2 or 3 times a year, and I met also with other nation minister of defense also to discuss about the way forward and the solution of the situation to tackle all any differences and any challenges in this region. To create and realize prosperity and security is very important. The bottom line is the stability and security and peace is very important, and we have to maintain. Then I believe that we have to maintain this stability and resilience in ASEAN. And what about the next one is the influence about untuk other nation for the ASEAN plus country that would like to apply as the member state of ASEAN also. Yeah, I believe there is an influence. There is like an impact if there is additional more. But it is like more positive impact if more nations would like to join ASEAN. Then which means that we will have more broadened understanding. At the moment we have China, USA, Russia. Despite the fact they have differences, so that's why the ASEAN have to make them unity to make sure that this region will be secure and stable. And the next one is about Rohingya. Yeah, there's a question. Yes, we have to take a very concrete action to mitigate the situation of Rohingya. I've heard from my counterpart from Malaysia, they have difficulty also to treat the Rohingya refugee. Almost every year there are many Rohingya refugees come to Malaysia. So that's why I believe that the United Nations have to involve and to support and assist related to the humanitarian action. I mentioned also that if we mishandle this Rohingya refugee, the IS start ready to recruit them as their member. I've been advised that the IS start to recruit the Rohingya. So that's why we have to handle the Rohingya appropriately and properly. I've already raised my suggestion and advice to Myanmar and Bangladesh to resolve the situation, and also the involvement of the United Nations is very important, and United Nations have also to take a strict action. And
defense of Indonesia in de-radicalization policy, maybe that would be the main question left to answer, the role of the Ministry of Defense in de-radicalization.
In tackling the spread of radicalization, we have the concept of the bela negara or defending the state spirit. It is the main task of every people of Indonesia. Out of 200 people of Indonesia, and which is mostly Muslim, there are already 100 millions that we already instilled and embedded the mindset of bela negara against radicalism, especially the Muslim community. Indeed, we haven't reached 100 million, but already reached at least 90 million. Already our people understand about the spirit of nationalism and spirit of defending the state. The spirit of defending the state, or the so-called bela negara, it's about our ideology, which means that we have to preserve our ideology. Then we cannot let our ideology to be replaced by the caliphate ideology or the khilafah ideology. And the concept of khilafah, they would like to nationalize every nation as a Muslim, and every nation have their own spirit of nationalism, and they have identity. So we keep having like some kind of propagating, and our strategy to socialize this bela negara is through education from the primary school to university. And I also keep visiting our provinces in Indonesia to propagate about the bela negara, and I keep reminding everyone the perverted ideology that we fight together. And I said that it doesn't make sense that a woman try to incite the children to kill. It is very misguided, and I also call all the principal of the university from all of Indonesians part to remind them about the dangers of this radical ideology. So I keep reminding all the Indonesian people through many ways. And the second way is about through education, and I also give speech and socialization to the Islamic organization and some social organization, and the police and the military, they have to observe the situation, and they have to learn the situation, and they collect the information through intelligent capability. So that's something that we have to take precaution, especially in Indonesia, and now we are doing very serious about this. Thank you. Thank you.
Mark. Thank you very much, John. Pretty quick for me. Look, just so you know that with respect to the questions around our defence capability plan and the comments I made about looking to step up and grow our forces, I'll be releasing publicly our defence capability plan 2019 on the 11th of June. So I'd suggest if you want to look into that. Just a sneak preview, on the back of the 26,000 tonne maritime sustainment capability, which is currently being constructed in Korea by Hyundai, we've taken receipt in advance of the plan being published of a new dive hydro vessel. It's an 81-metre vessel. The P8s will be supplemented by what we are calling an enhanced maritime capability. I'd suggest you keep an eye out for that. That's an extension of our ISR capability. And bearing in mind the size of our area of operations in the Pacific. And the other things to look for is the size of our army and the tactical airlift, which will be announcement on that within a week or so. With respect to the South China Sea, look, New Zealand has direct interests in the South China Sea. More than half of our trade passes through it. We believe all of the claimants are important partners. We have direct interests in the region's peace and security, in the maintenance of international law, including that reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and people's right to have unimpeded access to shipping, air routes, and as a trade-dependent nation. We are concerned about the rising tensions, and we're concerned that they be managed for the avoidance of miscalculations. But we've also always made it very clear that land reclamation, construction and militarization in the South China Sea was not conducive to peace and stability of our region. We'll continue to promote dialogue, to work with, to talk with China and the United States, and encourage parties' efforts to conclude a code of conduct for those ASEAN nations involved, and the effective and enduring maintenance of international law.
Thank you, John. There are a number of questions. If I can rephrase them, I think we can answer them as one theme. Isn't shifting economic dependencies or interdependencies a good thing? EU, Japan, EU, China, so on and so forth. The US-China trajectory, mention of Thucydides, a quote from Thucydides, the connection between economics and security, and what smaller powers can push for economic dependencies. There are diverse trends, and let me try to take it in a common philosophy. I think I said what was at stake is the current global order. And it's almost a given that the current state of affairs, inclusiveness, multilateral trading, rights for small states as much as it is for big states, are the norms. But there have been commentators that this universal principles was a cyclical shift, not a secular one in economic terms. So someone mentioned Thucydides, and we're all familiar with that quote, which goes to say, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. But there's a less quote which precedes that. And it says rights, as the world goes, is an issue only between equals in power. So when did this shift? And if you look at our historic civilizations, that big states and small states had equal say or had some say was not a given. And I think that's what Thucydides was alluding to in this classical quote. And this is what people like Professor Graham Allison was talking about when he talked about this. When did the shift occur? Perhaps some can take it to the Treaty of Westphalia. It goes on, obviously, after World War II, when you had the UN Universal Declaration of Universal Rights. But for us to assert, for a small state to assert that I have equal say on this table, requires an acceptance by a much larger power. And Singapore, not for one moment, takes this as a given. We think it's very hard work to maintain that state of affairs. And I think we had that DNA because of, obviously, for Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who had someone described him as ultimate realist and an ultimate optimist rolled into one. And DPM Heng Swee Keat, who was his private secretary, will, you know, if you have time, then give you much more anecdotes. And we sat at his feet and listened to this remarkable man who, there was no cognitive dissonance between almost ideals which were in contradiction. So I would carefully say, if you looked at our speeches, including PM Lee's masterful speech, is that we come from a position of ultimate realists, and we work as ultimate optimists. So what do? We persuade behind closed doors, corridors, talks, amid multi-drinks and whatever else there is, to persuade that there is a reason to preserve this global order and not change the fundamental basis for it. So if you take what's wrong with shifting economic dependencies as a tactical step, nothing wrong. In fact, it may be good. I mean, if EU decides that US terms of trade are too onerous, they strike up a deal with China, they increase their trade with Japan. But sooner or later, you're going to have lines that crisscross less and less. Whether it's technology, whether it's trade, whether it's security. And once you have 2 or 3 blocks with parallel lines and strong divisions between them, then you're set up for conflict, which is what happened in the Cold War, which is what happened in Europe with the alliances, World War II, World War I, World War II, where they sleepwalked into World War I because the alliances forced alliances among the 4 big powers to choose sides, and in World War II and so on and so forth. So we're very clear what is at stake, and we want to maintain the current system. We still believe that multilateral trade arrangements are not only important for economic dependencies, for economic health, but indeed for security. Because if I trade a lot with you, it's quite hard for me to fight with you. That's a philosophical question to many of the answer to many questions, so I hope that satisfies. Just 2 small specific ones were ADMM Plus. Singapore is open to more countries joining, and there are procedures, so we'll have to work through it. But on the difference between Xiangshan Forum and Shangri-La Dialogue, differences and similarities. Well, the similarities are I'd like to attend both. And the differences is that attendees are different. I've never had the privilege of meeting so many people from Central Asia and Xiangshan Forum, and I'm sure that here you have a different mixture, but I think both is value, and I encourage those of you who can to attend the Xiangshan Forum, because I think the dialogue is always good. But let me, on behalf of DPM Heng, my colleagues, SMS Maliki and SMS Heng, and myself, thank you for your contributions again. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Let me just offer a reflection. a couple of statistics and a couple of thank yous. The reflection on those last words that we've just heard, an interesting perspective to come from a position of realism, but work as optimists. Perhaps that can be a mantra that many of us can apply to our own strategic attitudes. And I thought interesting the warning that we just heard, which we should all, I think, heed, of the danger of the creation of 2 or 3 hermetically sealed geopolitical, geoeconomic ecosystems. We live at present in an interdependent global society, but there is a risk of the creation of a couple of separate strategic ecosystems that don't sufficiently overlap in order to ensure peace and prosperity. So I think we should take away those warnings and work over the next 363 days before we meet again at the Shangri-La Dialogue to ensure that risk does not occur. Some statistics about the Shangri-La Dialogue this year. We had 624 delegates. We printed 6,313 badges. We counted over 200 bilateral and multilateral intergovernmental meetings. 56 nationalities were represented, 44 government delegations participated, and 28 full ministers took part. So I think that was defense diplomacy at work. We had over 500 journalists registered to attend this Shangri-La Dialogue. By 3 p.m. Singapore time yesterday, there had been 40 million readers of English language reports of the dialogue. In the first hour of today's meeting, there were 2,850,000 users of the SLD19 hashtag between 8:40 a.m. and 9:45 a.m. This morning. So we are an evidence and data-rich based organization at the IISS, so we try to keep record of as much statistics as we can make available in open source way. So thank you very much for your participation. My 2 thank yous are first, of course, to the IISS staff who have worked tremendously hard here in Singapore, from London, in our offices in North America, and indeed our offices in the Middle East to help make this event a success. And of course, very much to the government of Singapore, to the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the civil defense officers, the police, the other agencies, and indeed the people of Singapore for their tremendous hospitality. So thank you all. Have a very safe trip home, and see you, as I say, in 363 days' time again at the 2020 Shangri-La Dialogue.
Okay, now let's welcome Macron. Yeah.